Welcome back and many thanks for staying with The Big Story. Tonight we are talking about the proposed coal power plant in Lamu and just the production of energy using coal, which has caused a lot of debate from environmental conservationists as well as from the other side, the proponents who speak to its importance in producing cheap energy that they say could, boost the country's economy. And with me in studio, I have Dr. John Musingi, who's an environment studies lecturer at the University of Nairobi. I also have Omar Mohamed El Mawi, who's the campaign coordinator for Decolonize Kenya, and Khalid Hussein joining us from Mombasa, who's the executive director for Haki Africa. And we are continuing with that discussion that we've been having. And I want to bring you in, Mr. Hussein from Mombasa. There is the money dimension to this entire debate, that Kenyans are paying relatively high, high amounts of money for residential use of electricity. In other countries that produce power using coal, they're paying almost half the amount. A few months ago, Kenya, we were paying at 20 shillings and 46 cents per kilowatt hour. South Africa paying almost half of that. Is this a benefit that we want to consider?
Aaron, these are arguments that are brought forward by proponents of the coal mining in Kenya, and they really have no basis. Energy is energy. What we're saying here is that we need clean energy. No one is against us having more energy. No one is against us having cheaper energy. The question is coal cheaper? And definitely it's not. If you look at the losses that we will be making, for example, if you look at the health issues that will affect communities, we will be spending far much more in terms of addressing the effects of coal. We are looking at respiratory diseases. We are looking at, like I said, premature babies, as was the example in South Africa and other places. If you look at the residue that will be poured into the Indian Ocean, we are going to affect the marine life in Lamu and all the coast of Kenya. All these are going to have huge costs that will be, sent back to the communities to bear the brunt of coal mining. And it's not definitely going to be cheaper. I think those who are arguing for it are trying to make it look like coal is cheaper, but it's not. We've talked about Turkana, the project that is already online, that all we need to do and what the government needs to do is to connect it to the grid so that communities can begin benefiting. So it is not true that coal is going to make electricity cheap. If anything, it's going to cost us as Kenyans far much more because of the environmental degradation, because of the marine life that is going to be destroyed, and more importantly, the health of Kenyans. They will pay far much more compared to the benefits, which are none really, from the coal mining.
Right, and I want to stay with you, Mr. Hussein. We have seen your organization as well as many other civil organizations just campaigning against this move and this project. Let's talk about the role of NEMA as Kenya's, main environment watchdog in steering this debate. How has it been playing that role?
I think NEMA has clearly showed us that it has failed Kenyans, particularly with the project in Lamu. We have talked about the environmental impact assessment that was done, completely locking out local communities to give their views. The opinions that have been shared by that report are totally misplaced. They do not reflect the true position on the ground. Kenya, for example, is a party to the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement talks about reducing harmful emissions, and Kenya is a party to that. Yes, you argue that the emissions will be around 500 compared to what Kenya is proposing to produce around 400, but that's not the point. The point is every country, wherever it is, we, as party to that agreement, is supposed to reduce harmful emissions, renewable gases and all these things. We are supposed to work as a country to try and improve our situation. There is no way that coal is going to help in any way addressing the local issues. We have said this and we continue to say, as Decolonize, as Haki Africa and all partners who are part of this, that we do support Vision 2030. Yes, we do support production of energy, but this coal is not going in any way going to help us to actually reach the targets that we have set. If anything, it's going to take us back. It's going to take away what we have been able to achieve so far in terms of the environment as part of our international standards, to meet the international standards. So that's why we are up in arms and we're saying we cannot allow our country to actually move backwards when the whole world is moving forward. Coal plants, if you look at it everywhere across the world, people are moving away from this. It's interesting how we are allowing, for example, China to come in to fund such programs when China itself is actually working to cut down some of these projects. Companies such as GE, would not be allowed to actually support these kind of programs in the US where they have their headquarters. Why then are we allowing this to happen in Africa, in Kenya? It is something that actually goes against international norms, international standards, the way we are heading at this point in time, and it's really a pity to see Kenya actually taking the lead in such kind of a program that is going to have devastating effects, like I said, to its environment.
Right, and I just want to also have the sentiments of Mr. Elmawi on this. In terms of environmental governance in the country, are we giving conservation as much priority as we need to?
I don't think so. I think in a way, we've burnt using of charcoal and burning charcoal, but then we want to have the biggest coal power plant in East and Central Africa. So in a way, we're not really moving towards conserving environment, but we're more of taking one step forward and moving about 100 steps back. Earlier you talked about in terms of why coal being cheap energy, and that's one of the things that the project proponents actually say. And I think one of the reasons is because Kenya and the way we're looking at energy, we don't follow it or adopt it in terms of the best standard that it's being adopted internationally. Because if you look at the current situation now, solar energy is actually almost at par or even cheaper with coal, than coal. And I think the biggest reason is because we actually ask people to bring in tenders rather than bidding. If you ask people to bid for these projects, I'm sure you're going to get very competitive prices and you're going to get the best price, and not just a person who knows who that gets a project, but rather the person who actually is going to give it at the best price. Also in terms of renewable energy and coal, I would like to say that of course we have more energy than we need, that's one, but also Kenya has the potential to be one of the leading sources of clean energy in the world, because actually right now we're generating almost 3/4 of our energy from clean sources. That's including geothermal, wind in Turkana, as well as hydro. So I don't see why we should move backwards and adopt these draconian ways of generating electricity. I have a friend of mine who says we normally emulate good examples from people and not the bad ones. If you look at the history of the developed countries, they've had bad decisions that they made, including slavery, apartheid, and other things. So these are not the things that we look to bring forth that this is what they used to develop, but rather we're looking at the best examples and also taking steps and try to be with how technology is as it is now.
Right, and Dr. Musingi, we seem to have really focused on that project in, Kwasasi in Lamu. But what about the coal deposits in Moe in, Kitui County? Are we also having similar concerns about what it would mean for the environment, for the coal mines there?
The coal mines in Moe Kitui, so far they have not been exploited, and somehow, in my view, we have switched from, we are no longer keen on exploiting those mines, those resources. The focus now is importing coal from South Africa and maybe Mozambique. The argument, I think, is you realize coal requires a lot of water, and in Kitui there is shortage of water. So if they were to mine that coal and put a plant there, they will need to do a big dam or maybe a big pipeline. So it seems the mines in Kitui are more or less not being activated. The focus is now in Lamu, where there is ocean water that can be used in the coal plant and bringing coal from South Africa. So the Kitui coal mines really, because I was actually involved in environmental work of that Mui Basin, and the work was just stopped midway without any explanation. So my feeling is that really the mines in Kitui are no longer, the government is no longer interested in them unless they can give another argument. But of course, the problem will still be there because if they mine the coal in Kitui, the environmental issues will still be there. So unless they want to evacuate the people completely from that area to reduce maybe the negative impacts of mining and coal plant, I think the issues still are the same, which are basically not good for the health of the people in the neighborhood of the coal mining and even the plant.
Right. And I just want to stay with you, Dr. Musingi, which just get your closing remarks even on the same, because we would be winding up in just a bit. Where do we go from here as far as this debate is concerned, as far as policy is concerned? What would be the prudent way forward?
I think one of the things, a good comparison is that coal plant in Lamu, the amount of pollution it will be emitting is equivalent to bringing 1.2 million cars into our roads. So you can imagine one source, just one plant, with pollution which is equivalent to 1.2 million cars into our roads, just from one source. So, and even I'm sure the moment we start operating that plant, Kenya is going to lose a lot because we are being given a lot of support because of our focus on clean energy. But now this will be totally moving out of what we promised in the Paris Climate Accord. So basically we are going to lose more than we are going to gain. And let us be honest with ourselves. This plant is not being built just because we have a problem with energy. The issue is just this issue of entrepreneurs, just making quick money. Because if you read even the program, the moment this plant starts is built, the government or the Kenyan people will start paying, paying for that plant for the next 25 years, whether the plant is in operation or whether it is in operating at lower capacity. The Kenyan people will still be paying for that. So basically, this is another scam that needs to, people need to say enough of it. But of course, it's hidden under the demand for cheap energy. People are saying, of course, developed countries are developing because they were using cheap energy from coal. But of course, during those years, there was no cheap way of doing, for example, getting energy from geothermal, or maybe getting wind, or even solar. But now that we have now technologies which have made this to be more competitive, there's no need of going backwards history, So in my view, Kenyans need to say no to this coal plant.
Right. And I want to bring in Khalid Hussein also as you give us your closing remarks. Where do we go from here? Some have even branded the opposition to this project as being an activist agenda. Where do we go from here?
Yes, thank you very much, Sharon. And I mean, for me, for people of Lamu, for people of the coast, first of all, it's a huge disappointment that the government has decided not to listen to the voice of its people, that the government has disregarded the health of its communities, that the government has put aside the environmental rights of the communities. Article 42 of the Constitution is very clear that not only do we have a right to clean and healthy environment, but we have a right to preserve our environment for the generations to come. This project, this coal plant, is going to take away not just these rights from ourselves, but also from our children and our children's children. And you know, it's for us, you know, that disappointment to know that we are not being considered, you know, by the same government that, you know, we believe is supposed to be there to protect us. How can the same government that is allowed, I mean, is supposed to be protecting us, be party to a project that is going to cause harmful, you know, repercussions to all these projects and to us as a community? So moving forward, I think it's time for us to now stand up to say no to the coal plant. We want to raise awareness, and not just within the communities, but also in officials in government. We believe, you know, that yes, there are tenderpreneurs, and that this is going to be another huge, you know, white elephant, huge scam. But we believe that if we can reach out to those in office, the people in authority, if they can fully understand what we are saying, because it doesn't make sense in any way you look at it. The project doesn't make sense. We want to reach out to these people and let them know what we feel. And for the communities out here, we are raising awareness. We are talking to them to come out so that they can actually be part of the movement, you know, the decolonize movement. Because if we keep quiet, and this is a message to all Kenyans, if we keep quiet, it is us who will suffer. We already have billions in terms of debts. We are now adding more in a project that actually is not necessary, is not needed by the people of Kenya. So it's raising awareness, and we're very happy for stations such as KTN to help us raise awareness so that people can understand what is actually happening and say no to coal. Coal kills, coal is poisonous, and we don't need it in any way.
And Mr. Elmawi, even as we raise awareness, proponents have said that, you know, people need to know also about the benefits. We have hundreds of jobs that will be created, affordable energy. Should the project go on, will these benefits be enough, even as you give us your closing remarks?
Thanks, Sharon. I actually earlier started by saying that if we're going to generate any employment for this job, it's going to be about 400 jobs, while we are affecting 6,000 or so fishermen out there. So it doesn't make sense to benefit 400 people and affect 6,000 of them. In terms of cheap energy, of course, we all know that all of the time cheap is expensive. When you go to the shop and you buy cheap shoes, you normally won't be able to wear them for more than a week. So if you look at, there's actually a recent holding by the High Court saying that all projects have to also include external costs. And external costs here include the damages to the environment, to health, to the livelihood of the people that are actually going to be living near the plant. So when you just put a total to all these costs that you're having, then you'll actually come up to a different figure than the one that's being given. And it makes sense for the project proponents because they can shift all these costs to the community, while themselves they're just gaining and getting money out there. While we were doing this project, of course, we've consulted with many experts. When I tell you many, I actually mean many, including air quality experts, health experts, people who do marine and ecology issues. And actually all of them, the sense that we are getting is that this project doesn't make sense. And I don't think you'll have all this opposition for something that doesn't make sense and augur well with the population here in Kenya. So I think it's time for the government and for the project proponent to realize that we have to put Kenya first. And also it's time for all Kenyans to realize that this is not really a problem about Kitui in terms of coal mining or Lamu in terms of the coal power plant, but rather this is a problem that's going to affect all of us, both health-wise, because there's an air quality study that was done that shows actually the effects are going to travel far and wide more than where Lamu is. But also, if this project proceeds and we don't choose the energy, then of course we all know what happens with the Kenya Power electricity bills that are going to come to you at the end of the month.
Right, okay, fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen, for your insights into this matter, into this subject, coal energy in the country. It's one that continues. That project is yet to set off and a lot of opposition there. So it's a wait and see situation to see how this conversation and the project is going to proceed. I want to thank Omar Mohamed El-Mawi, who is the campaign coordinator for Decolonize Kenya, and Dr. John Musingi, environmental studies lecturer at the University of Nairobi, as well as Khalid Hussein, who's the executive director, Haki Africa, for joining me for this discussion tonight. That's where we wind up the big story. Many thanks for watching and have a good night. I'll see you again tomorrow.